Okay, do we have audio now? Do we have audio now? Testing, 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 testing. A, B, C, 1, 2, 3. Do I have audio? Yes. Sorry about that. It was working perfectly when I set up. Everything was fine. And then when I hit start streaming, it somehow changed the audio device. Yeah, this is OBS, man. It's whatever. It was working fine before I checked it. Well, welcome. We've got Yatur Sadiq, we have Rudal, ICBM, Precisi Kakek, okay, Just Janice, Sergeant Grinch, and yeah, let's see. We've got Yakov, Your Highness, welcome, and Bob Fisher. So thanks, guys. Thank you for being here. Old Brown Cherry. Well, yeah. Okay, so where should we start? Let me see if this will actually work. Let me Okay, so no, there's something I wanted to show you guys, but I think we'll skip that for next time. But I released a video today. I used an AI voice. It sounded really good to me, and it saves me time. The question earlier was, does it make it easier to record using other tools like AI? And Adam Leuchter, welcome. Good to see you. Thank you. Um, yeah, when I'm recording, I mean, it's when you close the window, for instance, it can get really hot, right? So you're in uncomfortable heat to block out the noise, but also you have a low reason. Oh, by the way, as you can see, I've got a little empty spot here for reason dances because he might join me, so I just left that open. Yeah, so you've got dogs barking, you've got people throwing out garbage, you've got cars, motorbikes, and let's see. Hello, reason. Are you? Can everyone hear him? Yeah. So yeah, I don't see your camera. I'm not sure if you're displaying. Yeah. So Thaddeus, your camera is it? Yeah, definitely no camera coming through. But can everyone hear Thaddeus? Can't hear Thaddeus. Very faint. Okay. So apparently Thaddeus's audio is very faint. I see you, but now I need to add you into the. Okay. Yeah. So no audio, no camera here for Thaddeus. Yeah, I can see you on Skype, but yes, so Max Schuren says, watching your video on the Proto-Evangelion of James, I noticed the similarity to the birth of Buddha. Okay, yeah. So let me see if I can get Thaddeus back in here. Thaddeus, just say something, please. Can everyone hear Thaddeus now? Yeah, so, okay. So, yeah, some people are hearing Thaddeus. Yes, Thaddeus, people are hearing you. Just keep speaking. And now, and there's Thaddeus. Yeah. Some are saying no, some are saying yes, some are saying very faint. So that's okay. You know what? I'm going to try to. Good grief. Okay, it's just say something, Thaddeus.
Testing, testing. Is it better now?
So some can see you, some cannot hear you. That's just great.
It looks like yeah, we're getting ones, so I think that they can hear me just fine now.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mixed bag here. It's a bit of a mixed bag. So, okay, fine. The wonders of technology. So, yeah, I'm gonna have to try and fit you into the large screen in the front in the beginning, but because I'm not seeing you there, but I'm seeing you on the little one, so that's working, which is weird.
That's funny.
Okay, anyway, well, thanks, guys. So we have okay. So today's talk is about. So Thaddeus, let me share my screen with you so that you can see what's going on a little quicker and easier as well. Just going to share my left screen with you.
Very good. I'm seeing that now.
Okay, excellent. So what I'm going to do is, so Thaddeus, I'm going to briefly run through this. This is Plotinus. Now, I discussed Plotinus from before. Let me run through this very quickly just to catch everyone up. And so Plotinus was a pagan. And just give me your thoughts on this, right? His student Porphyry despised Christianity. His writings were widely read and accepted within the time of Augustine of Hippo, that's the 5th century, 200 years before Momo's revelations. Now, Al-Farabi, and I've mentioned him in passing before with you, seems to have borrowed political ideas from Plato via the Neoplatonists this guy called Plotinus. Now, the idea of the caliphate, he needed a template for the caliphate, and he took Plato's idea of the politia, or the republic. And this is how they built the foundation for the idea of the caliphate, the political, because the idea was in Plato's republic, you needed to control the whole world to run a perfect state. You couldn't be perfect if everything around you wasn't. So, basically, now, in Porphyry's account, Porphyry wrote a glowing account of his teacher, Plotinus. So in Vita Plotini, he says that Plotinus lived a divine life. He was more than an ordinary man. He had a divine nature. He possessed every possible virtue, and he had the highest moral and spiritual standards. His teachings were regarded as a legitimate continuation of the Platonic tradition, and he was a paradigm of philosophical perfection. And another point about Plotinus, he refused to have his portrait painted. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it does bear a certain similarity to a certain figure who claims to be a prophet, and his followers claim that he is a perfect man, the ideal character that everyone should follow. And then they tell us that they're not allowed to draw his picture. So definitely some interesting connections there.
Yeah. And I think this is all very, very odd. Thaddeus, your voice it's like you've got a second mic that's coming through. It's not like your standard mic. It's like you're coming through a different microphone. Even for me, it's like a little far away, like a cheap cell phone mic or something. So you might be using the wrong audio input.
What about now? Is it better?
Much. Oh my good grief, much better.
Yeah, it must have been picking up the webcam's camera or microphone instead of my actual microphone.
Yeah. Okay. So sorry, guys. Sorry about the bungling and all of that, all the technical stuff. But yeah, I know you guys think that despite being internet famous, you'd think we're perfect and technically amazing. But no. Yeah. So I mean, this is very unusual. So Al-Farabi, I need to dive into his history and life at some point and what he took from the Greeks. But he took a lot of knowledge from the Greeks, from the Neoplatonists, which made its way into Islam, legitimately made its way into Islam. And I mean, this looks like, for me, this is a template for Muhammad.
I mean, it certainly seems possible. Maybe they aren't like directly copying this biography, but certainly the idea seems to have been an inspiration for the biographies of Muhammad.
Yeah. So, yeah, which is just really unusual. So in the audience, if you guys want to drop a note and say, look, I mean, does this seem to ring a bell? Does this look like one of the sources of the Muhammad story, the Muhammad narrative, the Muhammad myth? So, because this to me seems like, because we know that Al-Farabi took a bunch of things from the Greeks via Plato, right? So who's to say he didn't take this idea and say, well, we've got the perfect state and we've got the perfect man, right?
Yeah, just for my reference, what time period would he be active? Would this be?
That's a good question.
Like the 1st century, 2nd century of Islam?
I think it's the 800s, more or less. Let's see, 800s, yeah. 800s to 950.
Yeah, so that would be right around the time that the biographies of Muhammad are being written for the first time, which is very suspicious, isn't it?
To me, yes. And now let's have a look at his concept of God. So Plotinus has this version of the monad called the One. Okay. Now I'm going to just be blunt up front so I can move forward faster. But the concept that Plotinus has of the One, of God, the Creator, is effectively identical for all intents and purposes. It is identical to the Islamic concept of God. Let's have a look. So his sovereignty, Creator, Creator, Creator. Nature, single being with a complex nature. That's the Creator God in Christianity. In within Plotinus and his Neoplatonism, it's a simple unity beyond being, a simple unity of pure will. But we know that Allah is also beyond being, beyond understanding. Right. So this applies to Allah as well. Intrinsic, because God comes to earth, God can be with you, whereas the One, the monad, is extrinsic, cannot come into dirty matter. Same with Allah. Allah doesn't enter into dirty matter, right? Allah doesn't come to earth. Can he be known through reason and faith? But in here, knowable only through complete submission. We know that Muslim is one who submits and is inscrutable, cannot be known. I mean, look, whatever, we can look in the dictionary, but we know that these ideas apply to Allah as well. Free, slave, and slave. Are we one for one so far, Thaddeus, on all of these?
Yeah, they seem to be matching up much better with, or let me clarify, the Islamic concept seems to be matching better with this pagan philosopher's concept than with the biblical God. Very strange.
Right. Correct. Yeah, correct. Good grief. Okay, basis for obedience, love, mysticism, and fear. Now, we know that, for instance, within the Islamic view, when you look at the other side, the haqqaiq, and you look at the high-level scholars, theirs is the level of mysticism. This is how they know God. And your basic Muslims have to obey Allah because it says in the Sharia that Allah lies in ambush. Allah threatens those who don't obey. So both of these are applicable to the God of Islam. Man has free will. You have to impose your will on another. There's a concept like that in Islam, Thaddeus. Sound familiar?
Yeah, definitely.
And then finally, submitting to Creator, obeying the Creator. Well, Islam is to submit. To be a Muslim is one who submits. Right? And then, of course, the day of resurrection is not mentioned. But otherwise, if these are 10, then it's 9 out of 10 or whatever it is. So
yeah, there definitely seems to be, it's not a perfect match, nor would we expect it to be. Muhammad or whoever is really behind Islam is copying from a variety of sources, but there definitely seems to be a lot in common here. And stuff that's not in common with the biblical conception of God, even though the Quran is claiming to be a continuation of the same teaching. You'd think that if anything, it would be copied from the Christian or Jewish God, but no, It doesn't seem to be the case here.
And that's a strong point. Thank you for making that, Thaddeus. You always catch the things that I miss. I mean, Allah is not like the Christian/Jewish, the biblical God. Let's put it that way. It's more like a pagan God, like this pagan God, this philosophy that this guy espouses here. So moving on. Okay, so Shafi, 767 to 820. So we are going to go at most length into Shafi's life, right? So he lives during the period where the Hadith and the Sunnah are collected. Fiqh, right? This is the exegesis of the revealed sources. So the corpus, the body of law, is becoming a structured formal discipline. Ijtihad, which is using reason to exegete the Quran and the Sunnah, right? The Hadiths, to create a structured formal body of law, right? He raises Islamic thought to the status of science, right? So now you have the science of law. And he develops a framework to reconcile the rationalists and the traditionalists. Now, I did show this before, but let me go back there. So Islamic civilization was split into two competing camps. So what you had was, down here in Mecca and Medina, you had the literalists, and over here you had the rationalists. These guys, okay, so down here, so literally down here, in Basra, and up here around Baghdad as we have today, Kufa, this area, you've got the guys saying, no, we need to use reason. And then here they got the guys saying, no, we need the book. And so now Shafi finds the middle way between these two. These guys are separated by like over 1,500 kilometers. So he brings harmony between these two sides. Okay, so reliance 4.9. So briefly, as you know, it says in the Sharia that common people should not think about theology. They must not discuss theology because corruption will find its way into their basic convictions, and they must confine themselves to contentment with absolute certainty. Don't think, do not even discuss your theology. It then goes on to state, that scholars disagree about the Quranic verses and hadiths that deal with the attributes of Allah, such as His hand. So there's deep uncertainty, and they don't want Muslims thinking about this. And they speak of the figurative interpretation of ta'wil, okay? And others say that such verses should not be given a definitive interpretation. Their meaning should not be discussed. So one, they cannot come down on any side of it. So there's no certainty. Even the scholars don't know, but yet you must not discuss these issues. Anything you take away from this, Thaddeus?
Yeah, well, this is completely consistent with the conception of God, that what their God wants is for people to blindly submit to Him. That's how you can have the best relationship, if you have this very servant-like or slave-like attitude towards Him. So it makes perfect sense that the people would be commanded not to think about anything. Likewise, the Christian conception of God is someone who wants to have a relationship, wants you to respond from knowledge, not respond from blind trust, but to respond with trust that's informed by who God is and what He has done. So we can see how the differing conception of God and His purpose in the world leads to these different philosophies. One
Right.
philosophy of investigation and another of submission.
True. I mean, so yeah, God wants you to know and understand and think and investigate, whereas Islam wants you, don't look, don't even discuss this. Just here's what you believe, accept it. Right, so let's have a quick look here. There's a couple of things here. Notice that this is very Gnostic. The world and all it contains are accursed. Right, so this is a very Gnostic idea. I'm not going to delve into this, but figurative interpretation of the Quran and Hadith. Now notice Ghazali, the most important scholar after Momo himself, those who are profligate in disregarding the literal meaning of texts go so far as to alter most or all scriptural evidences and proofs, metaphorically interpreting even the words of Allah. So now there's this dispute of this. Any thought on that before I go on? I'm not going to go too deep here, but
Yeah, well, that's very interesting. Interpret the words of Allah metaphorically, that i.e., the philosophical scholar who is allowed to think, they know better. They know what Allah really meant. And we see that every day with Muslims, don't we? That we read the supposed words of Allah and they say, no, it doesn't mean what it seems to say. It means something completely different. Very strange philosophy.
Yeah, it never means what it says, Okay, so yeah, there's that. And also notice, for instance, I've heard some members of his school say, he forbade metaphorical interpretation of all but 3 expressions, namely the prophets having said, the black stone is the right hand of Allah in His earth. This is literal. Verily, I find the breath of the All-Merciful from the direction of Yemen. Thaddeus, now we're back to Yemen. Isn't that weird?
Yes, definitely. But these are the 3 most important statements, apparently. That the black stone is one of Allah's hands. The heart of the believer is between the 2 fingers of Allah, and that the breath of Allah comes from Yemen. So
yes,
very, very strange.
So, I mean, are we talking about Sabaeanism again, the Yemenis? So yeah, that's just something. So let me. But guys, I just wanted to put that out there. But this, to me, again, gives you this whole Yemeni. Like, why this Yemeni link? Okay, Ahmad ibn Hanbal, 780 to 855, right? So this is, again, where Uthman finalizes the Quran around 656, at least according to the story, right? And we're going up to, so he founded the Hanbali school, Imam of al-Sunnah, the people of the Sunnah, born 780, Baghdad, 164 years AH, right? His school is prevalent in Iraq, Saudi, Qatar, Yemen, Damascus, Morocco, Algeria, that's Syria, Persia, and Pakistan. He is said to have memorized 130,000 hadiths, all recorded in his musnad. Okay, if you say so. And Imam Ahmad was among the most outstanding students of Shafi. So Ahmad ibn Hanbal was a student of Shafi, who said, "In departing from Baghdad, I have left no one in it more God-fearing, learned in sacred law, abstinent, pious, or knowledgeable than Ibn Hanbal." So Shafi praised Ibn Hanbal. And he was adept in Quran, Hadith, and Ijma, right? This is the consensus, and analogical reasoning. And he was possibly the most learned muhadith of the four imams. In other words, a muhadith has mastered over 100,000 hadiths. He is an expert in their interpretation, and there are no muhadiths alive today. They are scholars of hadith, but there are none of the category that came before. Any thoughts, Thaddeus?
Well, if anyone understands Islam, it should be this figure, right? He has more knowledge than anyone else. So let's see what he has to say.
I have spoken. Daduza wanted me to say those words. Yeah. So these scholars apparently are Muhadith are the best in making lies. Well, Yaakov, yes. Okay, now also, this guy didn't like reasoning. He was into literal sources, Quran, Hadith, and the consensus. So he was more like he's leaning towards the literalists, right? Muhadith, the usual term for a technical specialist in traditions, in hadiths, all right? There's more to that, but, that's enough for now. He was tortured for 29 months by the Abbasid Caliph al-Mamun to adopt the Mu'tazili belief of the Quran as a creation of Allah, not uncreated, not the literal speech of Allah, apparently. His funeral procession had 800,000 men and 60,000 women. He was a traditionist, and he emphasized Quran and Hadith with little personal reasoning. So this story, I am not going to buy this for a minute, that his funeral had 800,000 people at it, nearly 1 million people. But, he may or may not have been tortured. But I think this is embellishment to just make him seem more pious.
Yeah, I would say so. If you have a line of 860,000 people, I think it would take like weeks for them all to walk by the casket. So a bit of exaggeration there.
Man, back then there probably weren't that many people in all of Arabia. Oh, I don't know. But that's a lot of people,
Indeed, it's quite a lot. I believe that Rome, being the greatest city and by far the most populous city of the time, had about 1 million people. So, yeah, I would guess that there may be about that many people in Arabia, 800,000.
Yeah, the whole continent, as Tony says, the whole continent went to his funeral. So, yeah, they sold tickets probably. Yeah, so, and, okay, so then let's look at the Abbasids, right? So, the Umayyads were overthrown by the Abbasids in about 750. The Islamic jurisprudence, still in its formative period, had acquired its essential features. So under the Umayyads, there was this foundation of Islamic law already formed. For political reasons, the Abbasids recognized Islamic law as the only legitimate norm in Islam and set out to put doctrine into practice. They attracted specialists in religious law to their court and made a point of consulting them on problems that might come within their competence. At the request of Khalil Harun al-Rashid, Abu Yusuf wrote his Kitab al-Kharaj, a treatise on public finance, taxation, criminal justice, and related subjects. The Qadis, the judges, under the Umayyads, appointed by governors, were now appointed by the Caliph. They were specialists in religious law and had to apply nothing but the sacred law without interference from the government. This failed miserably. This project failed miserably. But notice, the sacred law was the law. Of course, Muslims today say, well, there's no such thing as Sharia, but anywho, so for those who want, Encyclopedia of Islam, Volume 2, page 888b, right, or 926 in the PDF for further expansion. Any thoughts, Thaddeus?
Well, I thought that, Islam was a complete system of life and it gave us the perfect way to organize society. So what do you mean that it failed miserably? I thought that all we had to do is instigate Sharia and then we'd have a perfect society. However, every time that is tried, the society seems to collapse pretty rapidly. Very strange, I would say.
Yep. Yes, that's so weird. I guess that's why Muslims don't want to discuss the Sharia with me. Encyclopedia of Islam. So let me just have a look. EOI Volume 1. I just want to bring this up. I'm just busy loading it. I had the wrong book loaded, so 926. And so I must have the wrong one. So I did show Encyclopedia of Islam, right? 2. Oh, my bad. I have the wrong copy open. So let me go to this document in the meantime. So twice I gone to the wrong book. Here we go. Okay. So I've mentioned this before, so let me briefly run through this. The differences between the schools were caused in the first place by geographical factors such as local variations in social conditions, customary law, and practice. But they were not based on any noticeable disagreement on principles or methods. So this tells us that Muslims should learn that even the best historians and their own scholars are saying that the schools don't have major differences. But there were differences, and they had to modify these differences based on this. And then also it's important, right, from the first decades of the 8th century onwards, Muslims were basically, so what Muslims were doing is they were taking the legal ideas they were coming up with, they were redacting it back into the past 200 years onto major scholars of the time of Muhammad, and they were ascribing their ideas to some of the great figures of the past. Right, this is openly admitted in this Encyclopedia of Islam. The doctrine of the school of Kufa was retrospectively attributed to Ibrahim al-Nakhai, and a similar body of doctrine was directly connected with the very beginnings of Islam in Kufa by being attributed to Ibn Masud, a companion of the Prophet who had come to live there. And then the same way, another companion of the Prophet, Ibn Abbas, became the eponym of the school of Mecca, and the school of Medina claimed as its main authorities the companions of the Prophet, the Caliph Umar and his son Abdullah bin Umar. So notice they mention here that Iraq, very early, by transferring the term Sunnah of the Prophet from political and theological into a legal context. Now, I went through that rather rapidly, but what you've got is they're trying to associate themselves with the past, and this may well be, shall we say, very sketchy. Because the major legal developments are happening in Iraq, not in Arabia. And they're trying to associate themselves with figures of the past. And notice it says that the term Sunnah is both political and legal. Your thoughts, Thaddeus?
Yeah, Abbas, a heretical Muslim who wouldn't call himself that, tells me that you have to reject any hadith that has a bad chain because it's connected to Iraq. But as I pointed out to him, that's going to be just about every single hadith, because that's where all the hadith are coming from. And it's very interesting that somehow, and Abbas is actually correct, that it's not very historically plausible that the companions were talking to people in Iraq, but that's because the whole story is made up, not because that particular hadith is bad. The whole thing's made up. They're just taking their ideas and projecting them on the past, just like the encyclopedia says there.
Yeah, no, exactly. So let's have a look at this timeline. So we're bringing up these timelines here. So we won't go for very long because Thaddeus has another show that may well be on soon. So let's have a look at the timeline. So we want to compare. Okay, so here you've got 600. Muhammad dies here. This is another time of Abu Bakr, then Umar, then Uthman, and then Ali. Right, so this is well after the time of Muhammad. Then Islam's center moves to Damascus. From Mecca, they move to Damascus, and you've got the Umayyad dynasty. Then if you notice, this whole line here is Baghdad. Baghdad takes over, and this is the Abbasid dynasty, which goes from 750, roughly, until 1258. So now notice, now have a look here. Here you've got, supposedly, the verses are collected towards the end of, after Muhammad's life, so in the period of Abu Bakr and Umar, okay? And supposedly, in the time of Uthman, the Medinan Codex is now collected. So the verses are only collected over a long period of about 20 years. Then, Okay, the hadith are created over this long time period here, and they are compiled. So they're created here, sorry, and they're compiled here. And if you look at this, you're looking at 632. Now you're going up to roughly 910, 920. So this is, Thaddeus, am I wrong? If this is this 300 years later?
I almost,
Yeah,
maybe like a little bit less than 300 years, but
yeah, but it's
close to it.
almost 300 years until the hadith are collected, are compiled, right? Notice
Hmm.
Ibn Hisham is here. Ibn Hisham dies in 833. So notice here, and these systems of the seven variant readings, we'll get into that. Shafi dies here, Maliki dies here, Hanafi was here. This again is more than 100, around 150 years after the death of Muhammad. Shafi is about 200 years after the death of Muhammad. Ibn Hisham here, good 200 years after the death of Muhammad. All of this is very late, okay? And notice the Quran commentaries only start in the 900s, more than 300 years after Muhammad dies. So the Quran is more than a century later. So your thoughts on this timeline, Thaddeus?
Yeah, I mean, just from my own knowledge, it looks pretty accurate here, but the visual form really lays out what we often say, that the Hadith are coming 200 plus years. Don't reach their final form till 300 years after Muhammad. The Quran, you have the stories that about Umar collecting the variant readings and creating a unified Quran. And I guess that's what this little tiny box over here to the left is that portion of the story. But then you have this gap to when the seven variant Qurans are arising. What happened in that interim period? If these were really the seven versions revealed by Muhammad, then why is there no trace of them until much later when people are looking at different Qurans and seeing they have variants and coming up with a story as to why they are different,
Yeah,
I guess.
exactly. So yeah, so let's have another look at this. This I got obviously from J. Smith. The late dates for the Islamic traditions. So the Sirah, right? This is down here. Muhammad dies here in 632. The Sirah, right? These are when these guys died. Al-Waqidi and Ibn Hisham, right? That's 200 years after. Abdul Malik, right? He's here. Now this guy is instrumental, but we're not going to go into his life. But notice the tafsir, the commentaries are here in the 900s. This is 300 years after Muhammad, right? The hadiths, 870, you're looking at 250 years after Muhammad. Okay. Can you see, as an audience, can you see how late all of this is? Muhammad dies 632. Look at this gap. So here you've got the Abbasids, this 141-year gap between Abdul Malik, who is the guy that, according to at least Shoemaker now and Reynolds, he's the guy that really formalized the Quran, not Uthman. So the whole idea, for those who don't know, the idea that Uthman finalized the Quran and made the canonical Quran reference, this does not seem to be true. There were multiple competing stories about this, and Bukhari simply took the hadiths or wrote the hadiths that said that Uthman did canonical and ignored the other stories, which have far more likelihood, far more historical and practical reasons for being true. One of those is that Abdul Malik had control of the entire empire. He could enforce an edict whereby he would have all the Qurans removed, burned, and replaced, whereas Uthman did not have this kind of authority. Your thoughts? Any thoughts, Thaddeus?
Yeah, I would contrast this to the Gospel or the New Testament in general. Conveniently, since Muhammad is said to have died in 632, you can kind of just drop the 600 off there. Say Jesus died roughly in 32 AD. So then we have like the first possibility of formalizing the text in the year 92, which would be the latest dates for anything in the New Testament, even going with the more liberal timeline, the less conservative timeline, and then you don't get anything else about Muhammad. You don't get his biographies, which is, of course, what the Gospels are, until the equivalent of roughly 233 AD, if we're putting this in terms of the gospel. And then you don't get
Yeah.
the rest of the canonical scriptures, the Hadith, until the equivalent of 270. So we're getting pretty close to the Council of Nicaea here in the Christian timeline,
Yeah.
when conspiracy theorists tell us that the Bible was actually produced. Total nonsense. But in Islam, that's more or less the reality. That is when their texts are developing, is nearly 300 years after the time of Muhammad.
Well stated. I mean, if you put it in that sense, I mean, Nicaea is like everyone has conspiracy theories about that, and these guys are working on an equal or worse timeline. And Dragon says the point is if Muhammad left and made Hijrah with only 70 believers after 12 years preaching Quran, why would they need 7 akhru for such a small community? I mean, that's a very good question. And the internet is attacking us. Apparently, YouTube's attacking our stream. Everything's looking very healthy. I'm checking all the stats. I'm checking everything. It's perfect on this end. So, guys, it's YouTube. So let me continue. We've got to finish up soon. So the problem of a northern hegemony, again from Sarah and Jay, the Islamic traditions say everything happened in Mecca and Medina, the Hajjaz, right? That's here. Yet all of the writers of the Hadiths worked in Baghdad, which is 1,800 kilometers away, right? All of these northern areas are where the Abbasids came from. And this is all into Persia, right? Bukhari was from Bukhara, which is like Tajikistan or whatever. So they all wrote the materials hundreds of miles and hundreds of years late. So, I mean, this is all very weird. You've got these guys far, far away. So these ideas have spread here and they've become canonized here. So, I mean, they've been transplanted out of their home, right? And which also might explain why with Mal and myself on that stream on Friday, Thaddeus, all of these fake Kaabas all over here.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. If you could go back for a second,
Yep.
if you assume that the actual center is Baghdad, then you got Bukhara way over there in the Indian subcontinent, not that much further away than Mecca. So that actually makes a lot of sense, that if things are spreading from Baghdad, that it would spread, every direction roughly equally, including down to Mecca. And then somehow Mecca is declared to be the origin, even though we don't see spread of Islam, substantially further south than that.
Yeah. So again, I mean, yeah, this is just the story. The story just isn't as pat as one would think it is. It's not as cut and dried as one would think it is. Clearly, there's more going on here. So Tabari is here in 923. I mean, this is a long time. Imagine Saint Paul. Imagine Saint Paul came 300 years after Jesus died. I mean, that would be a joke, And let's have a look at the Christianity's emergence according to Christian tradition. Okay. Now, there are scholars now, as the scholarship's improving, that would move these dates forward, okay, earlier, in other words, rather than backwards, right? So these are the latest. Now, we're using the latest possible dates to make our point clearer. So these are very conservative late dates, okay? Jesus dies here. Within 20 to 30 years, the book of Acts is written, okay? This would be, then you've got Paul's letters. These would be equivalent to tafsir. Then you've got Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. These would be equivalent to the Sirah, the Hadith. All of these happen within 57 years. The Islamic story takes over approximately 300 years to get written down. 300, that's 6 times longer. And apparently we have a problem with our, which is why they want to destroy this whole timeline. That's why Muslims want to attack this. Your thoughts, Thaddeus?
Yeah, I didn't know that this slide was coming up, but this is basically saying the same thing that I was saying when we were looking at the Muslim timeline, that here you have, according to the less friendly estimate for Christian beliefs, you have about 60 years for the compilation of the entirety of the New Testament. According to Islam's own traditions, you have 250 to 300 years for the compilation of their sacred texts.
Yeah, so let me just see. Okay, so let me continue. You have to finish at 7, Thaddeus, and 5.
So I will let you know
Okay, okay,
when unless I say something, can feel like you can continue on, because I don't actually have a firm
cool.
timeline on when my guest will be joining me, and I don't have any sign of him yet. So
Yeah, I won't go hugely long, so just another few slides. So let's look at variations. There are variant readings. Okay, variant readings in the Quran increased for centuries. It was not until the 10th century under Ibn Mujahid's influence that a single system of consonants was canonized and a limitation placed on vowel insertion in the language. So the 7 systems accepted by Ibn Mujahid were traced through 2 different transmitters, leading to 14 accepted variant readings. And these are Nafi of Medina, according to Warsh and Qawlun, Ibn Kathir of Mecca, Ibn Amir of Damascus, Abu Amr of Basra, Asim of Kufa, Hamza of Kufa, and Al-Kisai of Kufa. Notice only one Medina, one Mecca. The rest are not Mecca, not Medina. Al-Kisai, the book of Al-Kisai. So this for me is a really interesting. Al-Kisai of Kufa. And so yeah, this is just to me really odd that you've got this from the earliest Gnostic sect. These texts serve as the basis for the Quran used today, but while the contents are not exactly the same, all of them are accepted. Yet the Quran has not changed from the copy that's in heaven, in paradise with Allah. So you've got 14 different versions that are exactly the same as the one Allah has. And no Muslim can tell you which one is the one that Allah has. And yeah, so it's never changed, but there are 14 different versions that are exactly like the one in paradise with Allah. So, of course, that makes perfect sense. Now, this is from the Encyclopedia of Religion. It is of some importance to call attention to a possible source of misunderstandings in regard to the variant readings of the Quran. The 7 versions refer to actual differences in the written and oral text, to distinct versions of Quranic verses whose differences, though they may not be great, are nonetheless real and substantial. Since the very existence of variant readings and versions of the Quran goes against the doctrinal position held by many Muslims, it is not uncommon in an apologetic context to hear the 7 versions explained as modes of recitation. In fact, the manner and technique of recitation are an entirely different matter. What appears to have happened is that the community, being unable to agree on a single reading, accepted diversity as the norm and proclaimed all of the 7 or 10 or 14 to be correct. Thaddeus.
Yeah, well, this academic text, I don't know if you said the source, but if you did, I didn't catch it. But whatever this academic source is, they are speaking exactly the reality of the situation. The reality of the situation is that were variants. People misremembered, miscopied, maybe edited the text over time, and as a result, you had different versions of the Quran. As it says, they're not like massive differences. They might be like 98% the same, but the differences are differences. They're not, different pronunciations of the same word. That's just utter nonsense. And the early Muslims were quite honest about this. That's why we have, the accepted versions. This is the excuse that they came up with. The later Muslims, they figured out that no, there's much more polemical value in pretending that there's only one Quran. So let's just do that. Who cares what the reality is? Let's just pretend there's only one, so that we can tell everyone that every Muslim reads the exact same text and always has, and there's never been a single difference down to the letter. Exactly the same. This is a miracle of Allah that proves Islam, as long as you ignore all the historical facts.
Yeah, exactly. It's just okay. So yeah, we'll wrap up very shortly. So variant readings. So this is another book as well discussing this. It's an embarrassment for Islamic studies that no critical text of the Quran has been produced, right? And then one of the most fundamental Muslim presuppositions is that the text of the Quran has remained absolutely unaltered since the time of Mohammed. How can you have 14 different readings if there's been no change? And the prevalence of the variant readings of the Quranic text, the variants known as qira'at, demonstrate the falsity of the orthodox Muslim position. And they say here, so for instance, this idea of the existence of Mo, so there was some research being done on the Sana Codex in 1989, but it stalled due to lack of funding. They were looking for the original codex, all right? And it is further ironic that the existence of either 7 or 14 canonical readings of the Quran is accepted in Islam, and yet the implications of this fact for the unaltered nature of the text are not accepted. So they say, no, there's 14 different versions, but yet the Quran is not changed. I mean, that's just hypocrisy. So there are several contradictory stories related to the Quran's collection. You have the 7 metropolitan codices that were developed. Uthman selected the Medinan Codex as the official consonantal, which means in agreement or harmony. Right? So he chooses the Medinan Codex as the official text of the Quran. Right? Other texts come from Mecca, Basra, Damascus, and Kufa. So now you've got more coming from outside than from Arabia. Recent research indicates that there were additional codices. Written text did not appear before the 8th century. This is long after the death of Mohammed. So you're looking at the 700s. So you've got written biblical text completed by 57 years after the death of Jesus at latest. Here you're looking at well over 100 years, 150 years perhaps, or more. The text in these codices was unpointed, meaning that the dots distinguishing certain consonants were not present. The text did not contain the diacritical marks indicating where short vowels were inserted, and different variant readings of the same consonantal text were possible by choosing what marks to insert and where to insert them. The words could mean something completely different based on these diacritical marks. Any thoughts, Thaddeus, before I continue?
Yeah, well, just repeat that last point, that they can mean something completely different. The spelling might be similar, but the word means something completely different.
Yep. And this is something that really should be hammered home. And then from Charles Adams in the Encyclopedia of Religion, the same book I've quoted earlier, it must be emphasized that far from there being a single text passed down inviolate from the time of Uthman's commission, literally thousands of variant readings of particular verses were known. The variants affected even the Uthmanic Codex, making it difficult to know what its true original form may have been. Although Muslims of the present time generally have forgotten the very existence of these variant versions of the Quran, Arthur Jeffries has listed 15 primary codices from the companions and a large number of secondary ones. So now we know there were hundreds and thousands of versions. So,
yeah, and from a historical standpoint, this isn't necessarily the existence of variants is not problematic. This is just what happens when you're manually copying texts. However, it's a problem for the Muslims because they have made this ridiculous, undefensible claim that there's no variation in any manuscript right down to the letter. And they've made this one of the primary arguments for the truth of Islam. If they had just been honest from the start, they might not have a problem. But they weren't, because they thought that they could score points with this lie, and now they have a big problem.
Yeah, no, agreed. So yeah, I think maybe I should wrap up at this point. I mean, it puts us on just after 7, and I wanted to bring us up to that point, and because now I'll be starting a different chapter, so it's a different issue. But hopefully you guys have learned something. Thaddeus, what have you taken away from this so far?
Yeah, I think that the takeaway that the audience should remember as most important here is that the claim that Muhammad revealed the Quran and the Hadith go directly back to him, and all Muslims through all of history have been reading the same text, believing the same things. It's just utter nonsense. Islam did not develop overnight. It was a slow process that took hundreds of years, plenty of opportunity for whatever the teachings of Muhammad were to have been changed, corrupted, added to, deleted from. All the things that Muslims accuse Christians of doing could well have actually happened in Islam, because there's plenty of time for that. In Christianity, we have people who are directly connected to Jesus writing our scriptures. There's no opportunity for this fictional story to develop. Either the original authors are correct or they are wrong, but there's no possibility of this purely fictional development like we find in Islam.
Excellent. Thank you for that really good summary. You're far more articulate than I am sometimes. We've got someone who says, so Kaijane says, love all those timelines, Lloyd. They help me as a visual. You're very welcome. Yeah, it took me some time to put this one together. But yeah, it really does help to be able to see this and visualize the differences. I mean, this This is 600 years. You know, this is 600 years. I mean, this is insane. Whereas we know the Bible was put together much, at least the New Testament was put together much sooner than that. And Arnold Nathaniel says the variants are easily explained. Heaven is far away, so looking through a telescope, each scribe could not clearly see the eternal, uncreated Quran. Yeah, wow. And yeah, guys. So take screenshots. You know, if this helps you, and I can always put these slow and very long process of centuries. Repent says yes. So yeah, if you guys need this, I got some of this obviously from Jay Smith. He actually did allow he put one of his PDFs, which is like 200 slides online for people to download. It's fairly old by now. It's like 4 or 5 years old, but still goody. And yeah, so hopefully this taught you guys something. And of course, we also looked at this idea of Allah taken from paganism, right? And of course of Plotinus, because I mean, I think there's way too much overlap here with Plotinus. And, you know, that doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, definitely. The more we learn about Islam, the more we realize that the standard story just doesn't remotely hold up. It seems that whatever Islam is now, it definitely wasn't that in the 7th century. And what we really see is we see a gradual differentiation from Christian ideas, from Jewish ideas, where they're bringing in all this pagan material, all these diverse sets of ideas, often contradictory ideas. It's all pure monotheism, as long as you don't think about anything.
Yeah, you're not allowed to think about it. Don't discuss it. So yeah, so people seem to really like the graphics, the visuals. So yeah, so guys, I said take screen caps if this will help you. And remember to raise this with Muslims. When they talk about how late the Christian sources are, well, show them this and say, well, explain to us, show us the original Quran. We're looking for the Uthmani Codex. Knock yourself out, guys. So yeah, I'll call it here, guys. So these are the slides. So, you know, feel free to grab screen caps of these as needed. And yeah, we'll see you guys next time. Thank you very much. And God bless.